Several 400 environment change protesters been detained following several days of demonstrations in centre London. In spite the arrests, the Death Uprising activists say they will go on in their protests, that include inflicted traffic jam in places and destruction to components of London's social transportation web. Police of the protests has been criticised by several, but which powers do commanders include? And how include their tactic modified of early protests? Chapter 14 is a line how allows the police force to levy facility on a statical outcry, in some speech, one wherever a team of human beings collect in one location and remain put, quite rather than march or sometime. In relationship to the Death Uprising protests, the Met has specified how activists should go to neighbouring Raymer Arc if they desire to go on deprecating. If individuals failure to pursue the police force instructions, they can be detained and person the hazard of penal proceedings. The largest potential verdict for violating a Chapter 14 note, particularly if the condemned man was peace and has no latter convictions for such offences, is a contingent category, wherever a trial convicts but does not levy a verdict on the state of future crime isn't devoted. Chapter 14 notices are rather seldom utilized, but they can be while police force include preliminary note of a big outcry. Police force commanders can question them if they sensibly trust how the outcry may outcome in severe social disturbance, severe harm to characteristic or severe destruction to the lifetime of the society. They can as well be utilized if the police force trust the goal of the outcry is to frighten other. But protesters' requirement to be aware how police force include given a Chapter 14 line in honor of the outcry up they can be detained for a suspected violation. Police force will frequently try to talk how a Chapter 14 note is in strength via different tool, for example, transferring out leaflets, with public print or with a megaphone to address a mob. Commanders include option above if to do arrests. The Met told in a declaration, these are peace protesters, time destructive their actions are not forcible to police force, by themselves or some members of the social. We are looking at some tactic such as more rigid police force cordons. In any outcry, the police force might get the type how trying to conduct out massive arrests could reason anxiety, so by weight it of they expect how the demonstrations might slowly breeze downward of their own consent. Down there is as well a issue of asset. The official added how time everyone was formally arrestable, down there were not quite commanders to conduct out massive arrests. Moreover, down there include been accountable of several of those detained creature shipped as far as Bromley, southward London, due to a absence of police force cells in centre London. In answer to concerns above power, the Met told it had accident plans should cells be too overcrowded but rejected to talk its plans future for operative reasons. Down there were fleeing battles among commanders and anarchism groups that led to considerable harm. The next year, while several of the identical groups refundable, the Met answered in strength. Thousands of commanders utilized a tactics named as kettling to paddock crowds before they were captured, in which amounted to a humane pen at the really identical Oxford Cirque position now held by Death Uprising. Police force identified the anxiety makers and shipped in scrap squads to detention them. It took several hours for the town to back to regular and the crowds to be spread. How milestone judgment intended the police force could use the extraordinary deterrence force if down there was a true hazard of abuse. Death Uprising is various since down there is no risk of abuse, fair invasion and destruction, aided by DJS, portable carry parterre and the random jongler. In 2009, demonstrations versus the UK meet of G20 planet leaders saw both of peace and sporadically forcible protests in London. Environment camping, one of the peace demonstration, was such to Death Uprising. It was a flash, not notice invasion of a portion of the town of London, household of the Banking of England and some finance institutions, that police force couldn't halt. By previous night, the Welcome's captain on the land was worried down there was departure to be anxiety, not of the environment campers, but of the dispersion of else neighbouring team that he afraid could penetrate the Peace Road invasion. His commanders given Chapter 14 orders expressive the environment campers to leave by 19 o'clock. While they unsuccessful to keep, he concluded them time his commanders dealt in the some team. Which happened following deepened the debate. Channel of police force in revolt shields and batons grown spurred via the environment camping to break down up the invasion. Ultimately, following else giant legislative fight, the courts supported the welcomes judgment making how overnight, proverb the captain was titled to magistrate how abuse would include been inevitable had he not utilized the deterrence and dispersion policy. Its cost indicating out how time the Met has won these two key legislative cases above kettling and dispersion, a far more than severe occurrence happened for the G20 protests. Ian Tomlinson, an completely harmless paper seller dead following he was spurred above by a police force official as he tested to chief household. An investigation jury trial found he had been illegally annihilated and the official was after tested, but justified of homicide. No captain in accusation of police protests wants to go via how expertise once again. And how's why the order attitude to comprising and potential dispersant a destructive road demonstrate on the scope of death uprising comes downward not just to the law and police force asset, but the sentiment on the land and several intellect on the intentions of the rally.